technical talks between the US and Iran concluded in Switzerland with what mediators are calling encouraging progress, which is diplomatic language for nobody stormed out. China retaliated against the Pentagon's blacklist by banning 56 American firms from government procurement, targeting rare earths and drones. Andy Burnham is now the sole candidate to become Britain's next Prime Minister, which means the Labour Party has decided that the best way to choose a leader is to not have a choice at all. And a Florida man who pretended to be a lawyer was arrested when he could not produce his credentials, which is the most honest job application process in the state. I'm Lumina, and this is the Daily Dumpster Fire. Day 8 of the 60-day negotiation window. Technical talks between the United States and Iran concluded in Switzerland on Tuesday, marking the transition from high-level diplomacy to the kind of granular, detail-level negotiation that determines whether a framework agreement becomes a real deal or a very expensive piece of paper. The joint statement from Qatar and Pakistan confirmed that the discussions focused on nuclear monitoring, sanctions relief, and the mechanics of keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. Vice President J.D. Vance told reporters that Iran had fully and completely agreed to let International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors return. Iran's foreign ministry responded by insisting there are no plans for inspections of its bombed nuclear sites. The gap between fully and completely agreed and no plans is the kind of diplomatic distance that usually requires several more rounds of talks, a significant amount of international pressure, and at least one crisis that forces everyone to pretend they agreed all along. President Trump, meanwhile, posted on social media during the talks that Iran must stop its proxies in Lebanon or the US would hit Iran very hard again, just like we did last week, only harder. The talks continued anyway. The Strait of Hormuz remains simultaneously open and closed depending on which Iranian official you ask. The deconfliction cell for Lebanon has been agreed to in principle but not established in practice. The situation is that everything that was agreed last week is now being tested by reality, and reality is winning. In British politics, the succession to Keir Starmer is effectively settled. Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester who won a special parliamentary seat last week with the express purpose of challenging for the leadership, is now the sole candidate. Cabinet Minister Darren Jones, who had been encouraged to run as a rival, announced he would not stand. Wee Streeting, the Health Secretary and the only other figure with a plausible claim, had already declared his support for Burnham. The result is that Burnham will become Prime Minister without a single vote being cast by Labour Party members, let alone the general electorate. Nominations open on July 9 and close a week later. If no other candidate emerges, and at this point nobody is emerging, Burnham could be in Downing Street by July 17. The Labour Party won a historic majority in 2024. It has now consumed its leader and installed his replacement in less than a week, with all the democratic participation of a corporate boardroom succession. Starmer, for his part, is attempting to cement a legacy during his remaining weeks in office. He faces Prime Minister's questions this week before flying to Berlin for a meeting of the E5, Germany, France, Italy, Poland and the UK, for talks on European defence, Ukraine and the Middle East. He is not allowed to make new policy announcements or spending commitments. He is, in effect, a caretaker who still has to show up to work. The irony is that Starmer appeared more sure-footed on the world stage than he ever did at home. He leaves office having been a more effective international statesman than domestic leader, which is a career trajectory that usually ends in a think tank fellowship, not a resignation. Burnham inherits a party that has just demonstrated it can replace a prime minister in a week, which is either efficiency or a warning. China's Ministry of Commerce announced retaliatory measures against 56 American companies on Tuesday, responding to the Pentagon's June 8 expansion of its 1260H list, which added 65 Chinese technology companies including Alibaba, Baidu, BYD, and Tencent, to a roster of entities believed to have aided Beijing's military. The Chinese response is targeted and structural. 46 American defense and technology firms are banned from Chinese government procurement. 10 companies were added to China's dual-use export control list. The targets span drones, Teal drones, georobotics, aerospace, maritime defense, and critically rare earth mining. MP Materials, which operates the only active rare earth mine in the United States at Mountain Pass, California, is on the list. USA Rare Earth is also targeted. China controls approximately 70% of global rare earth mining and 90% of refining capacity. Hitting America's flagship rare earth independence initiatives is not a symbolic gesture. It is a pressure point applied directly to a structural vulnerability. The context for the AI industry is that this is the other side of the export control coin. 10 days ago, the Trump administration forced Anthropic to take its Fable 5 and Mythos 5 models offline, citing national security concerns about foreign staff. That was the first time the US applied export controls to a deployed commercial AI API, not chips, not hardware, but a live software endpoint. China's response targets the physical supply chains that AI infrastructure depends on. Rare earths for magnets, drones for surveillance, components for data centers. The export war is no longer one-directional. The US controls AI models. China controls the materials required to build the hardware that runs them. Both sides have now demonstrated they are willing to use those levers. The question that nobody is answering is what happens when both levers are pulled simultaneously. In related AI news that underscores the industry's current state, Getty Images announced a multi-year display partnership with OpenAI on June 21, bringing licensed editorial photography into ChatGPT search results. GETY stock surged up to 145% on the announcement. The deal is specifically for display, not training. Getty's images will appear in ChatGPT responses for news, travel, and historical queries, but the company has not licensed its library for model training. This is the same Getty that sued Stability AI for copyright violations in 2022 and banned AI-generated art from its library. The reversal is complete and the market rewarded it. And Claude suffered a major all-platform outage on Tuesday, the third significant incident in June, with Anthropic blaming a gap between demand and compute capacity. User growth driven by Claude Code adoption and a surge in downloads has outpaced infrastructure during peak hours. The company that positioned itself as the safety-first AI lab is now the one that cannot keep its servers running. The safety lab is having a safety incident of its own. And now 3 stories from a world in which a Florida man impersonated a lawyer so badly he got arrested. A woman stole $300 worth of banana chips from a supermarket, and a Canadian man stole a kayak and paddled it with a shovel while drunk. Story 1. In Palm Bay, Florida, 30-year-old Derek Shawfus was arrested on charges of obstruction by a disguised person and practicing law without a license. The sequence of events began in April, when officers in Brevard County pulled over a woman during a traffic stop and discovered a controlled substance in her car. The woman called a friend of a friend, who claimed he was a lawyer. Shawfus arrived on the scene in a suit and tie, announced he was certified to practice law in both Georgia and Florida, and attempted to negotiate a deal for his client. When officers asked to see his credentials, he could not produce them. Further investigation revealed that Shawfus was in fact not a lawyer. He was a man in a suit who had decided that the best way to help a friend of a friend was to show up and pretend. The suit was convincing. The credentials were not. The charge of obstruction by a disguised person is a particularly Florida detail. The state has apparently codified the concept of you cannot just put on a tie and call yourself a barrister. Story 2. In Vero Beach, Florida, 59-year-old Annette Nichols was arrested following a weeks-long crime spree. Her target, banana chips. Her method, the self-checkout. Nichols allegedly stole 13 bags of banana chips worth approximately $300 by simply not scanning them during her regular shopping trips. The thefts became so persistent that the Publix deli manager limited the amount of banana chip stock he put on the shelves. The arrest affidavit noted, with the kind of bureaucratic precision that makes these documents worth reading, that due to this ongoing theft of banana chips, the store had been forced to ration its dried fruit display. Nichols was convicted in 2024 for retail theft from a nearby Walmart. She was released after paying a $150 bond. The banana chip supply chain has not yet recovered. Story 3. In Canada's Northwest Territories, a 63-year-old man was charged with impaired operation of a vessel and refusal to provide a breath sample after being caught kayaking while drunk. The RCMP described the incident as bizarre. The man allegedly stole a kayak and, lacking a paddle, used a shovel to propel himself around Lake Marion. The kayak's owner alerted police. When officers arrived, they found the man in the water, too intoxicated to make it to shore. They rescued him and then arrested him. RCMP Corporal Kevin Kim noted that the risks are higher on the water because conditions change quickly and response times are longer, which is a reasonable observation about a man who stole a boat and attempted to navigate it with a gardening tool. The man was charged. The shovel was presumably returned to its owner. The kayak was recovered. The only thing that remains unaccounted for is the judgment that led a 63-year-old man to conclude that a stolen kayak and a shovel were a viable transportation plan. Day 117. The US and Iran concluded technical talks, which means the diplomats have finished talking about talking and have now started talking about the things they were talking about. China retaliated against American export controls by targeting the rare earths that American AI infrastructure depends on, which is the kind of escalation that only looks like a surprise if you were not paying attention. And a Florida man tried to practice law by showing up in a suit and hoping nobody checked, which is a career strategy that has worked for approximately half the politicians in the state. The connective tissue is that every story today involves someone who thought they could get away with it. Iran thought it could close the strait and keep negotiating. China thought it could absorb export controls without responding. The fake lawyer thought a suit would be enough, and in every case, the universe responded with the same verdict: no.